All right.
There he is.
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing well, my friend. I'm doing well. How are you?
Good, good, man. Happy Thursday.
Happy Thursday. How's your week been going?
It's been going. I think pre-pandemic, my motto was we have to thrive and not survive. But right now, I'm pretty okay with surviving.
Amazing, amazing.
Yeah,
Love
yeah.
your shirt, by the way.
Thank you. Yes, Black
Good to
votes
see.
matter.
Amazing.
So
Was that something you purchased or was it a gift?
yeah, I purchased it. It was something I saw online and was like, this is important. It's important to what I do, to who I am as a person. And, I'm all about statement attire, statement t-shirts, statement hoodies. One that I have that I really like just says feminist on it. And I wear it around. Dudes always give me a look and I'm like, that's what I am. You can't deny who you are. And if you believe in social justice, then you shouldn't be afraid to make people uncomfortable.
Right, right. And it provokes necessary conversation around topics
Totally.
that we just don't embrace or we just don't have the liberty sometimes to kind of come across.
Exactly. Exactly.
So that's amazing. Well, I'm excited about this conversation. Oh, let me also shout out this shirt. I just purchased it.
What does it say?
It's says "Keep Going Up,"
All right. I love that.
and my friend Brandon Nespong actually started it. Amazing guy, black-owned small business. He just launched it. So I think if you are interested in this shirt or other of his products, you can go to keepgoingup.com. He's doing some phenomenal work. So we're definitely supporting black businesses, and especially during this time.
Amen.
We,
Yeah.
there's a lot to celebrate.
Speaking of that, I want to do a little product placement here for my Ground Zero coffee. So just
There it
little
is.
little product placement there. And I got my Elizabeth Warren mug here. She's still my senator. Although she's won't be the United States president, she still is my Massachusetts senator.
Amazing, amazing. Yeah, well, we're looking good on all fronts. We got the attire, we have the coffee, we
Amen.
have the mugs. Let's get into some great conversations, which I'm sure we're all looking forward to this afternoon. So, just to give everyone some context into this conversation, first of all, thank you all for tuning in this afternoon. There's so much going on in our world today. So our hope, once again, is to provide a safe space where we can have meaningful dialogue and talk about a lot of the issues that we are seeing through the media outlets, through social media, that we're talking about within our own homes, with family members, friends, cousins, all across the world right now. We're in the midst of a huge pandemic, as well as dealing with the murder of George Floyd and racial injustice, racism, protesting, riots, looting, police brutality. It's a lot. And I'm not going to lie, Samuel, like it's been a lot for me to process this because, being Black in America, I think that
Yeah.
racism is multi-layered and the weight of racism is heavy because it's something that you have to experience. It's something that you have to express, and it's something you have to explain over and over and over again. And I think that's the weight that we're feeling and why it's so heavy, because it's one thing navigating it, but then it's expressing and explaining it. That's also just very tiring and very it's dehumanizing. So it's a lot going on. And so I hope that this could be conversations where we look at what's taking place right now with the protesting. Even as we're speaking, the Ahmaud Arbery hearing is happening. And I've been trying to catch some information as much as I can. But again, information travels so fast and things change so faster. And it's almost like, this conversation could be going in a different direction depending on how this hearing goes.
Yeah.
So it's a lot right now, just to give everyone some context of what I've been going through and just trying to process and progress at the same time, heal and then help at the same time. It seems like a lot of things are simultaneous within everything that we're going through. So to give everyone context, once again, we're going to have this conversation. It's going to be a great conversation. Looking forward to it. After the conversation, we'll jump right into a Q&A with Samuel. So feel free to add comments in the comment section or hold your questions till the very end, and we'll both be able to kind of dive into Q&A. So be sure to do that. We'll do that towards the end and have closing statements, but that's kind of an overarching idea of the program. Before we jump right into the show as well, I wanted to give a big shout out to the producers of this program, Ground Zero Coffee. Now, Ground Zero Coffee is a coffee company that me and a good friend started. There it is. We'll show the brand. Make sure you grab a coffee. But Ground Zero Coffee is East African coffee home delivery company and podcast service focused on community impact through storytelling and social enterprise. We serve specialty grade and ethically traded coffee sourced from its place of origin, Ethiopia, and the greater East African regions. We are coffee focused, community driven, and African sourced. From our Ground Zero podcast service to our community based initiatives, our goal is to improve lives within our community through education, resources, and access for all. And now all proceeds from your Ground Zero coffee purchase help fuel our commitment to impact our community worldwide. So this is an exciting thing. This even session is fueled by Ground Zero, and the purchases being made allows us to keep going. So thank you all for being an amazing group of coffee lovers and supporters, and being involved within the community impact that we're making together. So thank you all. Now, before I also jump into this conversation, I wanted to kind of give everyone an idea of who this person is that I'm speaking with today. Really excited about it. Samuel M. Gebru is an Ethiopian-American social entrepreneur, community organizer, and consultant. Born in Sudan to Ethiopian parents, Samuel moved to the United States at the age of 3 in 1995 and was raised by a single mother in Cambridge, Massachusetts. He discovered his vocation for public service as a 13-year-old, bringing attention to maternal health issues and raising funds for women suffering from obstetric fistula in his native country, Ethiopia. Samuel is currently the Massachusetts Development and Partnerships Manager at Generation Citizen and serves as the managing director of Black Lion Strategies. He sits on Just the Start Corporation's Board of Directors, City of Cambridge City Managers Advisory Committee, Jewish Alliance for Law and Social Actions Advisory Board, and on the Community Advisory Board of the Center for Virology and Vaccine Research at Harvard Medical School and Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center. So if you want to know more information about his work and his life, you can definitely go to his website. It's at smgebru.com. That's smgebru.com. Once again, Samuel, thank you so much for being on this program this afternoon.
Thank you, Nate. It's an honor to have this conversation with you. I've been a big fan of yours for years, as you know, and so having this chance to virtually have coffee with you and to talk about all things social justice, it's really my pleasure.
Yes, and likewise. I love all the work that you're doing. So first off, before we even jump into the issues, how have you been processing the racial injustice, the murder of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breanna Taylor, just as a whole, as a person? How have you been able to process this?
You know, that's a very important question. I don't know how well I've been processing it, right? I think a lot of people, when they think about racism, they think of somebody being mean to you, or someone saying the N-word or whatever. And yes, that is racism, but a lot of the racism that we see in the United States is really structural. It's covert, it's institutional. You may not even see it as racism when it's happening, right? You may only understand it as racism sort of later on in your life. And so I think it's super important to sort of couch it in that. And as somebody who, very fortunate to have grown up in an incredibly diverse city, but also aware of even the systemic injustices that we have here, processing what's going on. I really call myself an impatient optimist. At the end of the day, I really try to be forward looking, but I can't lie. I think what's going on right now is incredibly frustrating. You have essentially two pandemics in one, right? You have, the coronavirus, the novel coronavirus, and then you also have racism, right? And when it comes to racism, at least, this is a 400-year-old pandemic that we choose to continuously ignore in the United States. We have a cure for it. We have the policies for it. We have the ideas that will, really make us into an equitable society, but we continuously refuse to meet the moment. And so, for me, frustrated, angry, sad. I think sometimes there's a feeling of deflation. You see we are constantly drinking from a fire hose, right? It feels like I tell people all the time, I really feel like sometimes we're just living in some crazy movie, but I don't even think Hollywood could script what's going on right now. It's that crazy. But also, and I'll end with this, my optimism, my impatient optimism, my stubborn optimism comes from the fact that over 400 years, we indeed have moved forward. Although we feel and we are indeed taking several steps back almost every day, we have moved forward. I have one shirt that says, I am my ancestors' wildest dreams, and I think for many Black Americans that is truly the case. Just looking, 5, 6 decades ago, when we did not have the right to vote, and the importance of voting now. Hence the T-shirt that I'm wearing, Black Votes Matter. We are in places. You see what happened in Ferguson, Missouri, just earlier this week, where they elected their first Black and their first female mayor. I choose to remain optimistic because I really don't have any other choice.
Right, right. And I love how you just kind of opened us up into our line of questioning when we talk about these issues of policies, because right now we're in the midst of protesting. And now at this point, all cops that have been involved in the murder of George Floyd have been arrested and charged. And I was texting a couple of my friends. I was like, man, I'm relieved, but I don't know why I should be relieved. Like this shouldn't even have happened. As soon as this incident should happen, it should have been an arrest on site. But at least, we're moving in a certain direction. So, right now with these cops that have been arrested and charged, people have been protesting up to this point and continue to protest. What is our responsibility and what we should be doing within this moment in time?
I think first and foremost that it is really because of these protests that we're seeing, rather swift action be taken with this case, right? I know Keith Ellison, the Attorney General of Minnesota. He is phenomenal, that he is now in charge of this case gives me real peace of mind. I think that he knows exactly what he's doing. I know that he knows what he's doing, and is going to be able to really look at this equitably, right? We've seen this story be played out before, where there are juries that end up being all white or end up acquitting the officer or whatever. So I mean, they've been arrested, they've been charged, but there is still a long road ahead of us, right? We have to go through jury selection. I mean, there's so many pieces to the judicial process that we still have to uncover. And so I'm cautiously optimistic. Even with Keith Ellison there, I know that he is still fighting a system, right? I mean, the criminal injustice system that we have in the United States is really what people like him and others are trying to fight. And so I do want to also just give a shout out. A friend of mine, State Representative China Tyler from Massachusetts, is watching as well. And so I think, just in terms of what do you think we can be doing? I really think, we should be doing several things. One is we should be electing more Black people into office. Not just any Black person, right? Because not all skin folk are kinfolk. We know that, right? Shout out to Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina, who is a U.S. Senator, a Republican, and a Black man. I think that's an oxymoron. And we have folks like him. So, we need to realize that, you need to be Black, but you need to also be aligned with our views. And so we should be electing more Black people. We should be getting more Black people to be staffers in government and in political campaigns and, be the strategists of these campaigns. And we should also really understand the power that we have. I mean, if voting and if social activism was not as powerful as it really is, then Republicans and white supremacists would not be fighting this power so much. I mean, there's a reason why the president of the United States basically declared war on Americans this week. It's because he knows the power that we have. And so I don't think we should ever resign that fact. And we should really be intentional about how we use that. So I think the protests have been enormously effective. It is why we're seeing these charges. Think of Ahmaud Arbery. I mean, how long was that? I think 70, 80 days ago. And there's still, there is movement, but not so much. And I mean, how many prosecutors have fumbled the process? And it's only because there's been national outrage. I'm personally, Nate, I'm waiting for the outrage over Breanna Taylor's murder. I'm waiting for that to start because that one really hit home. Unfortunately, there isn't a dramatic video of Breanna Taylor being murdered like we saw with George Floyd. So at least with him, we were able to really be hurt, visibly be hurt by watching that. I will say I have a policy. I don't watch these videos. The last one I saw was Eric Garner in New York, and after that, it does not do good
Right.
for me. And I think we need to be aware of that for some folks who just can't watch these videos.
Yeah, I agree. I think the advancement of technology has definitely been able to put a microscope on the racism and racial injustices that continue to happen in this country. So it's not like racism has increased. It's always been there, but it's just the advancement of videos now and putting systems. That it has. It's allowed us to hold a little more accountability and weight to our voice. Even if we still have a long way to go, it's important that we're utilizing these devices to continue the path forward. As you were saying as well, it's a lot of information. I'm glad that you're very self-aware and that you don't watch too many of these videos, because it does affect me as well. And I was telling my friends, this past week, that there's only so much information that I can receive a day, to a point where I don't feel that our human minds have the capacity to process the information that we have access to as fast as it comes.
Yeah.
And so even with me, I won't have my TV on for throughout the day. I may check social here and there, outside of the things that I'm working on and doing and highlighting. But it's difficult to kind of balance being a consumer and being a producer,
Yeah.
of content and things of that nature. But one thing that I wanted to kind of talk to you, one thing that's very unique about us is that we have a connection to Africa with our families, specifically Ethiopia. My family's from Ethiopia and Eritrea, but I was born here in the States. Now, the relationship between African immigrants and African immigrants, African diasporas, and African Americans have always been unique. Though we share similar paths, we have very distinctive differences in history. With certain things that have taken place. What is the proper approach that you feel African immigrants and African diasporas can take in gathering a solidarity around African Americans during this time?
Yeah, this is an incredibly frustrating topic because, quite frankly, had it not been for African Americans enduring 400 years of insanity and hatred and enslavement, you and I would not be here. We would not be able to thrive in this country, right? I mean, just the basic things that we take for granted, like opening a bank account, being able to freely move across the United States, right? To be able to travel from Texas to Massachusetts to California, et cetera, to be able to sit anywhere you want on a bus or to eat anywhere you want in a restaurant or to be able to go to any school that you want to go to. It is because of people who literally died. I know we know all the the big ones, right? W.B. Du Bois and MLK and Rosa Parks and whatever. But there are millions of unnamed souls, and many who died in the Atlantic. I mean, let's be honest here, right? The Middle Passage. I mean, a lot of people died on that commute, right? And so there were people who were abducted and who were enslaved, but they tried to make something of themselves here in the United States and really against all odds have been a resilient people and have been people who have really thrived in the face of hatred and in the face of prejudice. So I think, almost, my gut reaction is like, how dare you, right? Like, how dare you not appreciate this history? The history between Ethiopians and African Americans actually is really interesting. A lot of people don't know this, but the first Ethiopians arrived in the United States as merchants in 1808. They came here to do business. A lot of people see us as having been refugees that came here in the 1980s and 90s. But no, I mean, we were here as early as 1808 in New York Harbor. Merchants arrived and they were here to do business. And if you know the history of the Abyssinian Baptist Church in Harlem, New York, the Abyssinian Baptist Church was co-founded by those Ethiopians and by free African Americans who were in New York. And they realized that it wasn't enough to worship in segregated churches, that God sees no race, God sees no identity, and we're all children of God, really. And so they formed the Abyssinian Baptist Church in Harlem with that mission, right? And over 200 years later, it still stays today. Not to mention during World War II, when Italy invaded Ethiopia and tried to colonize the country, African Americans were lining up in Harlem and in DC at Howard University, literally giving up their American citizenship so that they can fight in the Ethiopian army, right? And so there is 2 centuries of history between Ethiopians and African Americans that I don't think a lot of us understand, appreciate, or know. And I think that that's really where the tragedy lies. Like, I'm a student of history. I love history. And I think that we need to really appreciate, how we've been able to come here and thrive. We, in many ways, and, I'll dare to say this, and I know I'm going to get pushback for this, but in many ways, we African immigrants perpetuate white supremacy in the United States. I think that that's an important, very sensitive topic that we need to uncover in the weeks and months ahead and really crack open because, just, humor me for a second. Have you ever dated an African American?
African, yeah, I have actually.
Yeah. Okay. What was the family's reaction? Like, I hope it was positive, but like, not to put you on the spot, but I mean, a lot of our people sort of freak out at that, right? I mean, like,
I see what
we
you're
have
saying.
these perceptions, we have these views and stereotypes that we perpetuate of African Americans as being whatever, and that's just not true, right? We're really in many ways perpetuating these stereotypes, and I think we just have to understand that we are here because of them. We thrive because of them. We are fortunate in many ways. We don't have the we have not socialized and internalized the oppression
Right.
that they have,
Right.
but in many ways we have our own that we have to grapple with, right? And so I think to be nuanced about this and to be really aware of history is super important. And at the end of the day, ultimately, when you're walking down the street, you're Black.
Right.
And we have to own it. And we have to be proud about it. So I like to tell people, I'm an African American of Ethiopian origin. I claim it, I own it. It's something that I really believe in. I feel very comfortable and I feel at home with African Americans as equally as I do with Ethiopians.
Right, right. So when we're looking at right now with what we're dealing with the protests, and I think this is kind of the crux of our conversation and looking at how do we turn the demands of the protests into long-lasting, sustainable change with civic engagement, which I feel like that's kind of down your lane. What are you seeing right now for us moving forward?
Yeah, there's a spectrum of civic engagement, right? There is no right way to do it, right? When you think of civic engagement, what is civic engagement? Civic engagement is finding opportunities to improve your community. I mean, at the crux, right? And so protesting is an important way of doing that. But there are other ways, right? You can run for office, you can volunteer your time, you can work with an organization, you can register people to vote, you can mobilize your faith-based organization, your community, and so there are a variety of ways. And so I think what we have to do is really couch this as part of that spectrum. It is important to protest because it is quite literally the reason why these cops have been arrested. But that's not where we should stop, right? Like, going to a protest is great, but don't just say, okay, hoorah, we stuck it to the cops and now we're back home. Well, what's next, right? I love the TV show The West Wing. I don't know if you've seen The West Wing, but President Bartlett in the TV show always has this line where he's like, what's next? What's next, right? And so I think that's the way we should be thinking, as forward looking. And so, there are a number of elections that are happening this year at all levels that we should be part of, we should be aware of, right? Obviously, I hope, I pray that we are able to elect Joe Biden. We cannot endure what we have endured these last few days for the next 4 years. And so that's important. And I know many people have reservations. I would beg you to please get over it and really elect Joe Biden, because I think that is the best chance we have right now in order to push our agenda for social justice and equity. But in addition to that, we have to protect Senator Doug Jones in Alabama. He's a very vulnerable Democrat. We have to elect him. We have to reelect him. Republican Senator Susan Collins of Maine is very vulnerable this year. Let's kick her out. Let's kick her out. She loves to sort of pedal on the fence, and today she's a Trumper, tomorrow she's not, and it's like, nope, we can't do people like that. So I think it's really important that we really think strategically about how do we, first and foremost, what are our priorities? We need to articulate those, right? Like, what are the 3 to 5 things that we want right now? Do you want to defund police departments and demilitarize police departments? Great. Do you want increased investments for affordable housing? Great. Do you want to bridge the digital divide so that, especially now with the pandemic, everybody's doing online learning, but a lot of students don't have broadband access or even the hardware to learn. Whatever your issues are, clearly articulate them And then depending on what those issues are, some of these may be city issues or state issues or federal issues. And so depending on what those issues are, you're going to need to identify who the decision makers are, right? Who are the key people that you should be targeting? And then really start reaching out to them, right? There are certain issues that my member of Congress, Ayanna Pressley, has jurisdiction over that I can talk to her about. I'm not going to talk about I'm not going to talk about foreign policy with my local city councilor, right? I can talk about that with Representative Pressley. And so I think it's just important to understand what are our priorities as Black people in America. And then again, going back to your previous question, we need to really embrace our shared Blackness. And understand that our issues are the larger Black agenda issues, right? Like we're all in this together. There's no difference between Ethiopians, Africans, African Americans, Afro-Caribbean, whatever. At the end of the day, we're all Black. We're here in America. We're in this boat together, and we can either sink or swim together. So I really think it's important for us to couch it in that larger Black agenda, because there are a lot of really great Black movements that are out there. And amazing organizations that are established and that we should be part of instead of, just doing our own things sometimes.
Yeah, and I think so many times, especially with, when we talk about having a pro-Black agenda, some people take it as an anti-white agenda, which is not true. There are communities that, there are people in communities that can be able to vote and push for legislation and different things that affect your community. And that's very important that you are registered to vote, that you are your voice is heard, and that because if you're not represented, then you're not going to be able to have certain things that can be able to really support you, within your own communities and how you live and how you approach life. So I think that's very important to be able to look at that. Now let's scale it down to kind of looking at what's happening right now with the police brutality and the Black communities and the protesting. So would you say that right now looking at local government would be conducive to kind of help alleviate some of the agendas that may be at hand right now? What would you say would be the proper direction that we must take in order to really make effective change, within local government?
I think local government, so I ran for Cambridge City Council, Cambridge, Massachusetts in 2017. And the reason why I ran was because local government is where you can really have the most direct, immediate impact on the lives of constituents. The most immediate. I mean, the president of the United States, no matter who that person is not going to be able to fix your pothole. The president of the United States does not oversee parks and recreation, right? I mean, let's be honest here. Even, Betsy DeVos as the Secretary of Education, those education curriculum is set at the local level with school committees and school boards. The U.S. Department of Education really oversees major high-level issues like education, civil rights matters, and whatnot. And so I think it's important to understand police departments, law enforcement, a lot of that is overseen at the local, county, or state level, depending on how your state is governed. And so it's important that we understand that I think the President Obama, my forever president, Barack Hussein Obama II, and others have correctly articulated. A budget is a statement of your values, and so one of the things that we should be doing, and this isn't just for government either, nonprofit, corporations, whatever. I mean, a budget is a reflection of your values. You cannot tell me that equity is too expensive. You have to look at your budget and show me what you're doing. I don't care that you say Black Lives Matter. Frankly, that doesn't mean anything to me. I want to know what your policies are. And so thinking about budgets, there's an initiative right now in the city of Los Angeles to defund the police department. I think by 40% that they're advocating for there. And so even with the militarization of police departments, Nate, when you look at that, a lot of these police departments benefit from a program with the United States Department of Defense where they get surplus military equipment. I mean, this stuff is meant for war. Like this is not meant for regular civilian oversight. Like this is, I mean, that police departments are even signing on to collect military equipment from the Department of Defense. I mean, for me, that is just outrageous. It is beyond understanding. And so I think, we need to couch it in this. We need to be looking at the line item budgets of police departments across the country. And then also to the larger point of prosecutors, again, to bring it back to that, prosecutors, district attorneys, attorneys general have a lot of leeway, right? I mean, a district attorney can decide if a crime was even committed to begin with, right? And so in Suffolk County, in the city of Boston and its immediate surrounding cities, Suffolk County residents in 2018 voted for a new district attorney. Rachel Rollins, the outgoing one, was retiring. And Rachel Rollins is part of this new breed of DAs across the country who are dynamic, who are progressive and unapologetic about it. And she has been very intentional about making sure that justice is at the center of her administration. And so we need to be thinking about what are the laws that we have at the state and local level that govern policing, that govern the criminal justice system, and how do we fix that, right? I mean, district attorneys have a lot of power, but we also need to give them the tools so that they can start to reform the system as well. And frankly, if these people don't reflect our values, we got to vote them out. Like, we can't just wait, right? I often say that an election at the end of the day is a job interview. You're either hired or fired. We have the opportunity on November 3rd to fire Donald Trump. That's when the Human Resources Department convenes on November 3rd, and we are the Human Resources Department. We get to decide whether or not we want to keep him in the White House. And so it's really important, at the local level that we really think about our police budgets and go around to really getting folks to do that. I mean, I would love at these protests, man, if they were able to give out copies of their municipal budgets to everybody and say, this is what the police budget looks like. This is what we spend on policing versus what we spend on education versus what we spend on human services versus what we spend on public health, right? I mean, I think at the core of it too, and this, a lot of the functions of police officers in many cities, not all, but in many cities, they are expected to be social workers, they are expected to be nurses, they are expected to do a lot of other things that are beyond the traditional scope of law enforcement. And so I think it's really important that we think about that and say, look, like, let's take that money away from a police department and actually bring that into public health or into human services and say, okay, we need more social workers and less people with a firearm.
What are some helpful resources that people can get a little more engaged within voting and knowing dates and so forth? Can you give any practical tools or websites or ways that process works for people that may be watching, looking to get involved?
Yeah. I mean, so there are a lot of different organizations out there that are doing phenomenal work. Obviously, I'm a member of the NAACP. The NAACP is one of the this is one of the foremost civil rights organizations in this country. Color of Change is an amazing online racial justice organization that I would strongly urge everybody to look at. Color of Change has a lot of really cool social action and they have a lot of very tangible action steps. The Obama Foundation actually put out a really cool toolkit that was part of President Obama's Medium article earlier this week. So I would definitely look at the Obama Foundation, My Brother's Keeper, for sure, as part of that foundation. And then also sort of, on a local level, I believe in local civic engagement. So I think folks on this watching should really think about, what are the structures in your area? Is there a local Democratic Party that you should be part of? I think we like to complain a lot about the Democratic Party, rightfully so. I have a love-hate relationship with the Democratic Party, but the best way to influence it is to really, in my opinion, work from the inside. Get elected, join your state committee, right? Join your city or town committee. If there's a ward committee, join your ward committee, right? And so you should be part of your democratic structure. And get elected and help pass resolutions and decisions that reflect you and our values. And so I would definitely suggest people to really think about how can they embed themselves into these structures. And also, not a lot of these things take a lot of time. It's not like it's time intensive or something either. And so I would really suggest people look at these sorts of tactics. Aside from that, also, I like to write. I process heavily by writing. And so, if you like to write, think about setting up a blog or setting up a Twitter account, or write for your local newspaper. Talk to the editors there, and they may be able to run an op-ed that you write about a particular issue. That obviously a really good op-ed is one that has a provocative idea that is well researched. And so think about that as another way for those of you that like to write. Getting in touch with your local newspaper and writing an op-ed about Black lives and how we shouldn't just say that they matter, but that we should show it, right?
Right. Something that I've been thinking about, and we have about 20 more minutes, I believe, within this session. So I want to make sure I get this question in for families and people that are raising children that are Black families. How do you talk about racism to children? This just seems like something that, if you grew up in a white family, you probably never really had to talk about getting pulled over by the cops. Where, in a Black family, that's probably one of the biggest conversations, how you approach police, or what you do when police approach you, and how you interact in schools. And it's very complex. But what are some ways that you think, in your opinion, that we should be having these type of conversations with the next generation?
Yeah, I will not presume to know what it is to raise children. I do not have any. I think that part of it, and I wrote about this in my blog post earlier this week, that, racism is truly learned, right? Bigotry is learned. It's not like you are born and you're like, I hate Black people. That's not how it works. And so I think one of the things that we need to do is really introduce people at a younger age to civic engagement. I know that is one of the things that was commented here is, wherever it's safe and wherever it's possible, taking young people to civic actions, whether it's a protest or phone banking, if you're phone banking for a candidate, or if you're doing a house party for a candidate, or a letter writing campaign, or whatever. Or even, my favorite is taking children to vote. When you go vote at a polling center, take your kids with you, or take, whatever with you. When someone turns 18, get them registered to vote. In certain states, you can pre-register people at the age of 16. Pre-register people to vote. I will. I think he's watching, but my godsons, I love them to death. And when they turned 18, I swear to God, for their birthday, my gift to them was voter registration forms. I had them fill it out. I had them fill it out at the restaurant. People thought I was crazy. Literally, the whole table looked at me. It was so funny. And I was like, nope, we're doing this. And they're like, for real? And I was like, yes, you are registering to vote, and I will personally submit it to the City of Boston Election Commission, right? And so, I think these are the sorts of things that we should be encouraging. We should sort of hold each other accountable. Do a phone tree. A lot of friends of mine, they will text me a few days before Election Day saying, Sam, who should I vote for? Whatever. And so it provides me an opportunity. Usually now I just have a thing that I copy and paste and send to everybody, where I'm like, okay, this is your slate. This is who I'm recommending. This is who I'm endorsing. And so I think really thinking about, how do we get young people involved at a younger age when it comes to hate and solidarity. I think really part of it is also exposing people to other types of people. I think, as a human thing, we fear what we don't know, right, Nate?
Right.
We fear what we don't know. We are afraid of the other. And quite frankly, for a lot of white people in this country, they haven't really interacted with Black people. When I was in undergrad, I had friends of mine who said, you know what, Sam, you're the first Black person that I'm actually friends with. And for me as an extrovert, I saw that as an opportunity to sort of break barriers and to create understanding. But that's not the responsibility of Black people, right? We should not expect that Black people are going to be the ambassadors of the race, right? That's ridiculous. And so I would say definitely exposing your children and other young people that in your life to diversity, whether it's in school or out of school, making sure that they are well-versed and cultured, making sure that they go to libraries, right? Libraries are free, they're public. And then also, I just want to put in a plug on Saturday, in 2 days, Sesame Street and CNN are doing a town hall for children on racism. And so the Sesame Workshop, which owns Sesame Street, is a phenomenal organization. A lot of us just know them for Sesame Street, but they do a lot of other stuff internationally. And they are holding a dynamic, awesome town hall for children on Saturday. I unfortunately will not be able to join it, but if you have the ability, anybody that's listening in on this, please watch it. It's gonna, I believe it's at 10 a.m. Eastern time on Saturday.
That's great. Thank you for adding that. That's phenomenal. I'm so glad that we're
Yeah.
reaching younger children through that format on ways that they approach these huge issues. That's amazing. So at this time, I think we're about 16 minutes. I'm guessing 15 minutes. I want to make sure that we open up the floor for people to ask questions. So if you have any questions, feel free to start adding comments, and we'll go ahead and have that discussion. One person, I think this is Dansa665, says, what does your organization do to help our children learn about civic engagement and activism?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Generation Citizen is a national organization. It's been around for a decade. And we have a curriculum called Action Civics. It's experiential learning, so students learn civics by doing it. And this curriculum is embedded in classrooms across the country. Our footprint is in about a dozen states. We do heavy programming in 6 of them. So California, Texas, Oklahoma, Rhode Island, New York, and Massachusetts. So we're not just in, the blue progressive areas. And for us, our belief is you want to completely transform the way that civics is taught in public schools in America. Our target are middle school and high school students, making sure that they have the tools, the understanding, the skills, the knowledge, and the motivation, right? The disposition, the psychological belief that they have an ability to change. And so this isn't an after-school program or whatever. It's usually a history teacher or a civics teacher, if there's a civics teacher, that would deliver this curriculum. And over the course of a semester, students choose topics in their communities that are important to them. And they spend class time researching the issue and coming up with a policy goal. It's not a public awareness campaign. There has to be a policy goal, right? So we've had students that have successfully advocated to increase mental health funding in their schools. We've had students that have successfully advocated for plastic bags and styrofoam to be banned from their cities. We have had students that have gone to, Massachusetts. Some of our students went to the State House to testify on anti-vaping legislation, right? Vaping obviously is a big issue among young folks, and so they were there to testify against vaping. And so, these students are gaining what we call the civic skills, civic knowledge, and then civic disposition, civic motivation. And the ultimate goal is to equip the next generation of Americans with these important attributes. And these are the future voters. These are the future office holders. These are the future folks that are going to be in finance and in medicine and in business. And we want to make sure that they have the understanding and the ability to actually impact change. So, Generation Citizens work is phenomenal. I work on our Massachusetts site where I lead policy advocacy, strategic partnerships, and fund development.
Awesome. One other question that we do have is they say, thank you. This is Bookie Justin. Thank you for being here today. What are you both doing for your own self-care? Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Great question.
You want to take that first, or you want me to take that?
Go ahead.
Oh man, self-care. That's I am the ambassador of everything that is not self-care. So do not self-care, man. For me, knowledge is sanity. So you know how you said that you sort of tune out sometimes from the news? I can't do that. I need to always be aware of what's going on. And I think it freaks me out, to be honest, sort of what goes on. But I think I process things when I'm fully aware of what's going on. And I love to really dive deep on issues. And so I find myself spending hours looking at articles and reading scholarly journals and whatever to really sort of understand an issue. And I have a lot of friends that I sort of just text and have a lot of conversations with to sort of everything I can't tweet, I send them. So there's that. And then, honestly, one of the upsides to staying home over the last several weeks is, you don't have to dress up every day, and you're sort of casual. I can't believe I'm saying this, but I think I've gotten sick of Netflix and Hulu, and so there's that. It's just there's only so much TV you can watch. But I think again, I'll just go back to what I said earlier. I'll reiterate. I have this policy of not watching those police brutality videos, and that's quite intentional because when I used to before Eric Garner, it would really get to me, and so that policy of no watching is something that I strictly adhere to.
Yeah.
How about you? What do you do?
Yeah,
Also, I drink a lot of coffee, so there's that. Just to plug in again,
there it is.
ground
That's the
zero,
plug. That's the plug. Yeah,
Exactly.
I think for me, I think
Yeah,
self-care is found in self-awareness.
yeah,
And
yeah,
that's what I've been learning more about
yeah,
as I've been able to kind of take care of myself. One, it's I control the information that I'm intaking every day. I'll turn the TV off. I may give myself 1 hour a day to really look at certain things that I've missed, and
yeah,
so I may seek information out maybe 1 hour out of the day. I work out, I pray, um, I get in group chats with friends with childhood friends that I'm just very
yeah,
familiar with, and we talk about things that are happening without any filters. So we get a chance to kind
yeah,
of like exhaust, our feelings and our thoughts, and quite frankly, talking about things that are just nonsense and just
hmm.
laughing about different
I
memes.
love that. I love that.
It's
Yeah,
the best when you can, just talk to someone
yeah,
without really thinking too much,
yeah,
and how to articulate what you're trying to say, but just people that just know you and
yeah,
get
yeah,
you. I
yeah,
think community has been healing for me. So I look
yeah,
for those type of people within my community that I can just trust, I can kick my feet up with, and just really be able to just dive into unfiltered conversations with. So that helps me a lot.
yeah,
Also, if I am watching or taking in information, I'm making sure it's something that is a positive representation of who I am or who I'm
yeah,
striving to be. So I'll watch inspiring documentaries, or I'll watch great movies, or listen to great music that's just changes my mood.
yeah.
Going for walks, getting myself
Mm-hmm.
out of my own working home environment. So there
Mm-hmm.
is a multitude of things, but I think it always goes back to self-care is found within self-awareness.
Yeah, yeah. You gave a far better answer than me. I think I undersold myself for the record. I do some of the things that you mentioned.
Yeah.
I'll say one of the things that I started during the pandemic was I have this weekly group that we have lunch, virtual lunch every Wednesday. And it's fellow Black people that are interested in politics. And we get together, and it is an hour of complete unstructured time. It is funny. It is absolutely funny. Because to your point, one of my strong beliefs is never, ever, ever take yourself so seriously. Like, just don't. Like, life is way too short. And so, I like 99% of the time I'm facetious. I like, it is the things I say sometimes, but like, it is really just about having fun in the moment and finding joy. We really have to, especially in these tough moments, find joy, however that is. Is that going out to a restaurant and having good food? Is that traveling? Like, I love to travel. Right before the pandemic, I was in Miami for 4 days. That was fun. Like, so it's find joy however you find it,
Right.
and do it. So to your point, I think self-awareness is important in understanding what are your boundaries, like what are your triggers, what gets you, and don't do that.
Right. Right. I
Yeah,
agree. I agree
yeah,
100%. This may be our
yeah,
last question because I know we're running out of time and we'll probably have closing remarks. But what are some of your best
yeah,
practices about highlighting and discussing race within an organization where the staff and leadership are majority white?
yeah. That's a great question. And hopefully we can try to fit in one or two more questions. I'll be very brief.
Yeah.
A few things that come to mind. If you work for a company or a nonprofit, particularly, but even government, again, look at their budget, look at who they're spending money with. Are the vendors that you choose, right? Your consultants and the people who do your printing and whatever, are these union shops, are these women owned, Black owned, LGBT owned, like whatever, right? Like, think about sort of where is, again, your budget is a reflection of your values. So where is that money being spent? Don't feel afraid to make people uncomfortable. I mean, racism is uncomfortable. Sexism is uncomfortable too. I mean, we're both men, and having these conversations around sexism, whether or not we ask for it, we benefit from patriarchy. So these conversations are indeed uncomfortable, but don't be afraid to have them. Definitely form affinity groups. I think those are very important. I think where people can come together as Black people and people of color and women and others. I think having some sort of affinity group or caucus or whatever within your workplace provides solidarity.
Mhm.
So it's not just you. If it's just you, then obviously that's a lot more challenging. But I think the other place where I think there's a lot of traction, obviously, is around hiring practices, making sure that there are a lot of really cool new ways to hire people where you sort of strip any identifying information like their name or whatever, anything that sort of can inspire bias, if you will. And so thinking about that, making sure, do you have the ability to sit on a hiring committee? For instance, if you do, you should join it, right? And so I've sat on several hiring committees over the years, and it's really awesome, just even for your own personal development, being on the other side of the hiring process. And so I think being very intentional about it. And then again, I would say if you're going to come up with criticism or with ways to improve, come up with a list. Like, be prepared with very specific ways. I like to see problems as opportunities. So don't just, state these are the things that are wrong here, but really to state these are the things that I would like us to improve, right? Look at it from a sort of asset-based, strength-based perspective. So, those are some things that I would suggest to look at.
Yeah, I think also, and just to even add on to that, one thing I want to be clear, and especially with people that are Black within Black communities, that we are responsible to educate people on racism and racial injustice. It's one thing. It's already difficult just living it and experiencing it. But again, if you do have the capacity, feel more than welcome to do so. And I also think whether you're white or Black, or you're talking race relations or racism, it's very uncomfortable. I think change happens at the speed of trust. So I think before you talk about any type of life-changing or meaningful conversations around things that are controversial, I think it's important to be able to establish trust through relationship building. I remember
Mm-hmm.
one conversation that I had with a good friend. It was one of my white brothers, really good friend of mine. He couldn't really see the significance of Black Lives Matter,
Yeah.
and I didn't see anything wrong with that. He just didn't have much education about it, and he was making his own assumptions based off of maybe a media outlet that he subscribed to. So one question that I did ask him, though, that I remember it's being very pivotal within our relationship in general, was I asked him, I said, how many Black friends do you have? And then he literally just couldn't answer it. He says, you? And he was like, maybe this one person at church, but I only get a chance to talk to maybe after service is over really quick. So I was like, okay, that's the issue. Before we could talk about a lot of these controversial and uncomfortable conversations, let's work on building relationships with people that have different views, that are different races and ethnicities, so that we can develop a sense of empathy. And then once empathy is embedded within a relationship, it's easier to have these type of conversations. So I would say, whether you're in a work environment or an educational format or in church, wherever you are where there's a huge integration of people and population, I think it's important that we are able to be cognizant of getting ourselves uncomfortable and building quality relationships with people of all backgrounds, so that we can have more educated conversations that can be beneficial for who we are as a global community. And I
Yeah.
think that's one thing that I do treasure from our relationship that we had together. I felt like I got a deeper understanding of his worldview and values, and he also got a better understanding of my worldview and values. And from
Mm-hmm.
there, it's our responsibility to take upon ourselves to dictate what we do with that information. Because at the end
Yeah.
of the day, all we can do is educate, and
Yeah.
each individual is responsible for what they do with that education. So
Yeah.
we have 2 minutes left. Closing remarks from Samuel. Really want to hear from you on next steps forward and how we create sustainable change from protests to public policy.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. I think that's a great way to end on relationship building. I think, one of the things that a lot of us in politics say all the time is, if you're going to throw someone under the bus, right, whether it's in a press conference or whether it's in a hearing or whatever, call them the day before, let them know. And so to your point, like I would, for me, if I'm going to call you out on something publicly, it's because you've done something incredibly egregious. Otherwise, my preference is to take you aside and say, hey, you may not be racist, but the thing you said was racist, right? And so to really help people identify their weakness areas. And generally, I mean, all of us, we are far more receptive to feedback when someone's not coming for us, right? So like, let's just be aware of that and sort of how we build relationships beyond just race either. You know, again, I am an impatient optimist. I think over 400 years, Black people in the United States have gone through a lot. But I will end with in 2017, about a month after I lost my election, went down to Washington, D.C. for a few meetings. And part of my trip included visiting the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture, which I like to just refer to as the museum. And if
20
you
seconds.
have, yeah, I think everybody should visit the museum. It starts in the basement with slavery. It's depressing, it's dark, it's deep. And you just go up and you go up and you go up. And as you go up, your heart lifts. And that's how I want
Four
people to see it.
seconds.
This is a relay race.